everyone. On today's podcast, we're going to talk with Rikki and Nova Jenkins about their decision to plan a home VBAC and the journey that led to a hospital transfer. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast. Today, I am so excited to feature a member of Team EBB who is here to share her birth story alongside her husband. So first we have with us Mark, also known as Nova Jenkins, is a Grammy-nominated producer, entrepreneur, and a proud girl dad. He's joining the podcast alongside his wife, Rikki, to share the beautiful and powerful story of their youngest daughter, Amora's birth. Rikki Jenkins, who's here with us, is the Evidence-Based Birth Instructor Coordinator, and she's also a doula, childbirth educator, and an international board-certified lactation consultant, or IBCLC. Rikki is co-founder of Heart and Soul Collective, a nonprofit aimed at reducing the disparities for birthing people in Las Vegas, Nevada. Rikki is girl mom to Nina Jean and Amora Rain. Nina is 8 and Amora is 18 months. Welcome, Rikki and Nova, to the Evidence-Based Birth Podcast.
Thanks for having us. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're so excited to listen to your story and kind of finally, I want to get all the details of this birth that was 18 months ago, but it still feels like Amora, in my eyes, is your baby. You know, she's so cute. So.
I know, it goes so fast.
It really does, yeah. So now that you've had time to kind of process everything that happened, could you start off by sharing what inspired to plan a home birth for Amora, especially after your experience with your first birth?
Yeah, absolutely. So during our pregnancy journeys, we had kind of a rough start. Our first birth ended in a miscarriage, and then we got pregnant with Nina right after. And so, of course, being pregnant after a miscarriage, pretty much every day you're scared of having another. So that birth was rooted in a lot of worry throughout the pregnancy. And then we tried to learn as much as we could, which kind of catapulted into why I'm here today, of course. And then our pregnancy experience, I feel like was very disconnected with her, and our childbirth experience as well wasn't the best. Even though we prepped as much as we thought we were prepping, we had a doula, but we didn't understand the disconnect between like the hospital and then, of course, learning the disparities and why we were treated the way we were treated. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to Amora's birth, we did a lot of planning. We were dead set on having a home birth just based off of our experience. We really wanted an experience for me, I really wanted him to be included. I felt like with our previous pregnancies, it was very much like, oh, you've done your part, Dad, so like get out of here. So that was very important to me. And then of course, having, I'll say, the privilege of being a birth worker, kind of knowing the lay of the land, being a birth doula to clients in the past, I feel like we were very secure in wanting a home birth. And I feel like by proxy, he's a birth worker. And so we kind of went into it knowing like, okay, we feel safe. We don't have a lot of the fears that, most people would have, outside of this work.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Nova, what were your thoughts on planning a home birth?
I was excited. I was excited for the experience, really. Like before, it was like, in the first birth, it was a lot more scarier thinking about doing that. I think mainly from the lack of education, to feel like, oh my gosh, having a baby, we got to go to the hospital going into the first one, versus her years of experience and being in the community and then being like, oh man, home birth will actually be better, and in a sense for the people that we had around us and had access to provide that like ideal experience.
Mm-hmm. And then Rikki, for you, part of your goals for pursuing a home birth was to get a VBAC or vaginal birth after cesarean, because that first birth did end in a cesarean. So was that part of your decision making? Like, is it hard to get a VBAC in the Las Vegas area?
Yeah. And I mean, it happens. We really wanted that individualized care. I really wanted care from a midwife, well, we both did. I really wanted that care. It's unmatched. Midwifery care is unmatched. Our appointments aren't rushed, and just seeing, I've had the privilege of going with my clients to their midwifery appointments and just seeing firsthand, like, this is completely different. It truly is family-centered care. And while you can get that in the hospital, it's not always guaranteed. We have the nuances of providers and what providers to go to, what providers take insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And so with Amora's birth, we had a lot of privilege. We were able to do what we decided to do was we did dual care. So we had an OB and then we had our midwife, and that kind of made us feel more comfortable, even though looking back, I'm like, I wish we just didn't bother going to an OB, because even in our transfer, we didn't go through our OB because in the end, we weren't a match, which a lot of people find that even with a provider who shares that they are supportive of a VBAC, towards the end, we found what we kind of call the bait and switch of like, well, I'm not going to let you go past 39 weeks and I'm not going to let you, do certain things. And so we really got to see like, okay, well, we're staying with our midwife because we didn't see the side of our provider until the end.
So you were having, I think some people call it like parallel care, where you're kind of like getting duplicate services when the services aren't integrated, because they're like two different systems, right? So, and then it sounds like you were looking for really individualized care and midwife-led care and that kind of support and more intense support and like true support where you knew they believed in you and their wishes were aligned with yours.
I'd say one of the biggest differences was like their intention for information. Like, and I say that like, when we go to the provider, it's kind of like, check boxes. This is this, Tom's, you got 15 minutes, boom, and you're out of here. Come back in 3-4 weeks, versus our midwife and doula. That was probably one of the most incremental pieces is our sessions. Well, our doula happened to be a trained therapist. So we got the benefit of having like these like counseling sessions when she would come, and she would be there for more than an hour and we could talk about different experiences that we had. And, we let a lot of stuff out, we discussed things that we hadn't discussed before, which was very beautiful, emotionally and mentally going into that. And then for our midwife, it was like, I could just ask her any question, and it was no rush, I'd be sitting there cooking dinner while she's getting checked and like, hey, but what about this? And what if this happens? And it was a very family orientated, very immersive experience. And that gave us a lot of peace throughout, and I think one thing I valued most about this pregnancy was, at least for my part, to ensure that she had at least amount of stress as possible. Like if it didn't need to be a stressful thing, then let's not make it that, and having that additional care definitely was the whipped cream on the ice cream.
Yeah. I can just picture you three now and in the kitchen and the discussions with your midwife. It's amazing that you were able to build that kind of trust with her. And there was quite a gap between this second and third pregnancy, right? So were you finding though that you were processing things about the previous birth that you hadn't really thought about or processed together?
Yeah. And that's where, the doula really comes in. Because I know, they say you can't be your own doula, you can't be your own this, but she was the first person who ever asked our first birth story and asked specifically to Nova. I don't think we've ever had that discussion. And that was very healing to us because it took 7 years to even think about having another. I was dead set on never having any more, just based off of our experience. And then it took a lot of discussion over the years to even get to the point of planning to have our next baby. Because we actually planned to get pregnant with her this year or 2024. Because we got pregnant in 23. So she was kind of a year conceived early, but like we were planning for her. We, interviewed our midwives and things like that, 8 months before we got pregnant. So yeah, it definitely took some time, but I feel like it was essentially the best time because it was like experience and I got to see, VBACs and things like that happen as a birth doula. So it gave me a different level of confidence too.
And what were some of the things you were hoping to avoid this time? that you experienced previously?
Just based off of like experience, stories we hear as doulas, I really wanted to, one, avoid a transfer, of course. My other main thing was, it was really like, I wanted to make sure that he wasn't left out, that we both felt comfortable, but also I was really worried about not only the transfer, but like the care that we'd receive, right? Because we hear different things. Like some places they're super supportive that we hear of, but that's more of like the unicorns where we don't always hear like the best outcomes. Previous clients of mine, we've had to really do a lot of advocacy and navigating because they were labeled as different things. We still have that stigma around home birth and going with a midwife. So that's one of the biggest things that I was like, I really don't want to be exhausted from the birth, because you already have this defeated feeling when you're transferring. And so I didn't want to go to the hospital and kind of have this, oh, well, we told you type of thing, or you shouldn't be having a home birth anyway. So that was one of my biggest fears going through the process, even having the tools, right, of knowing how to advocate, but that's the last thing you want to do in birth and labor. So that was the biggest thing. And we did a lot of education on what that would look like, how we would want that handled.
Yeah. And what was the reason for your cesarean the last time?
The first time, heart rate decel. So Nina's heart rate was like up and down, up and down. And so we really didn't know. We didn't read any about that. So we were really unprepared. I was dead set on having a vaginal birth. That's something that we kind of navigated through. And it was very much like we weren't understanding. I'm very much like, just tell me why and explain to me. And we unfortunately didn't get that. It was a lot of fear. They would pull Nova out of the room and say, your baby is going to die. Your wife is going to die if, she doesn't make a decision. None of that was like really communicated directly to me. It felt like they were pitting us against each other. And so I felt like, they eventually were like, you need to get a C-section, like stat, so it was very different.
And I think we wasn't married either.
We weren't married. Yeah, we weren't married at the time with Nina.
So it was even more of a disconnection from like, you don't really get to say nothing like she has, and it was cool, it was just, but it really felt like I was like a negotiator between her and what she was going through, because she's physically going through this trauma, while, physical and mental. And then, I'm like on the sideline kind of like, hey, let's go doula. Doula's like, oh my gosh, they didn't prep me for this. And then the nurse is just like, well, this is what it is, and then it was really, it was hectic. I just felt like a critical negotiator. That's what
like in a hostage situation or something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it definitely felt like that too, because I remember just the one point that was the most traumatizing where they were like, because I was like, I want to talk to the provider. Like, please let me talk to the doctor. Because when he came in for triage, he was like super cool. He came in with like a coffee and he was like, everything's fine. And what time do you want to have your baby? And he was like, do you want Pitocin? And I was like, no, I want to have the baby naturally, blah, blah, blah. And so he was like, okay, cool. I'm going to go do a C-section and I'll be back. And then the minute he left, it was a completely different story. The nurses came in and they were like, oh, he's going to want to break your water, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, this is not the conversation we just had. And so it was very much like, can I talk to the provider? I want to talk to the doctor. I don't, want to necessarily talk to you all anymore. And they were like, he's not going to come in here unless you consent to your water being broken. And at one point I was like, okay, I consent. And then when the doctor comes in, then I'll have a conversation, because it seems like that's the only way. But it was very much when he came in, this part was very traumatic. When he came in, the nurses literally held me down as he was breaking my water. And I just remember screaming like, no, like, this is not what I want. I need to talk. But by that time, he broke my water. And I remember like screaming out in pain. And I will always remember that he was like, if you can't handle me breaking your water, how would you think that you could have a vaginal birth? And then from there, I, remember having the visceral reaction of like, it felt like I left my body from that point. Like, and then, they kind of went through surgery and all of those things after that. But I remember just like checking out and was like, whatever. And I don't remember like coming back into my body essentially until after, well after the birth and, probably for a long time. So it was a very different experience. And after that, I was like, why did this happen to me? We did all the things, we had all the education, or so we thought, and it still happened.
How traumatic. And like what you're describing is just outright obstetric violence. You were trying to avoid a transfer. Now I can see why, you're trying to avoid literally people attacking you in your last birth. So yeah. I can see how you had a lot to process. And I think we've had somebody else on the podcast before. We can link to it in the show notes about the importance of processing your cesarean before you attempt your VBAC, or even deciding if you're going to have a VBAC versus a repeat cesarean. There's a lot of stuff you have to unpack.
Yeah, absolutely. And we really got the opportunity. That was really the only opportunity. And it's interesting because I was like, oh, we're good. We've got here, it's lots of years.
It's years later.
Yeah. And we were asked the question and we were like, wait, we didn't truly process this. And so I was really grateful that we were able to do that before our experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nova, you mentioned, getting support from the midwife and the doula, and Rikki mentioned education. Was there any like specific education you all did or preparation for getting ready for a VBAC at home?
Yeah, I would say extensively. I mean, we took every birth class again, even though, we kind of knew all the information. I think that was like a 4-week course or something, 3-week, 4-week course.
Yeah, we took Floor Cruises one because it's more advanced. I wanted something because we had the base knowledge, and so I was like, I want something where we feel pumped up. So that course really felt like it was geared towards like someone who's already given birth before. Mm-hmm. So it was a little bit more advanced and really got into the nitty gritty of like, okay, what is it going to look like? How do you plan? What is the logistics versus like, here's the beginning. And it was like, I wanted to skip that because we already knew. So,
mm-hmm. And what was the name of it again?
It was Floor Cruises, Badass Mother Birth there on Instagram. So she had, she had a birth class.
That makes sense. That would get you pumped up. And so you were planning a home birth with the midwife and a doula then as well?
Yeah. And the midwife, it was cool because, and even picking the midwife, which is hard because it's like, I know them. And so, but it's different. Again, I wanted to make sure that he felt comfortable. And I also wanted to kind of step into the, I'm just pregnant role, right? Like I didn't want to necessarily be looked at as, everything. So we're good. And the midwife we'd chosen, Camilla, she was really good at saying like, I get that you know these things, but let's make sure that you understand and how this applies to you. And then we wanted someone who was like, I'm going to tell you the truth. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat. I'm going to make sure. And she's like, at any point, if I feel uncomfortable, I will transfer you. So that's a little bit of what we really wanted. I really wanted to make sure that our whole family could be included. That was really important to me. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, that was big. Camilla was real big on not being a hero, and she made that really clear. She was like, I believe in it. Obviously, this is what I do, but I'm not with taking chances and taking risks. Like if it don't make sense, if something's not lining up, we'll go to the hospital. And that, that honesty and the setting that expectation was a very good like navigation going into the, the labor days.
Mm-hmm. So we know the midwife's including both of you in your care. What about Nina? What was your plan for having your little girl at or not at the home birth?
Yeah, she was there, and her being a part of like the prenatal care, and that's something that I wanted to, is her included, and then of course our dogs. Unfortunately, our oldest dog passed away when I was pregnant, but she was included in everything. She was included in the prenatals. She, listened to the heart rate. She took my blood pressure. Our midwife brought her kids to our appointments too, and they got to play together, which was nice because it was like she got to be occupied while we, discussed different matters.
That's amazing. Yeah. So tell us about Amora's birth story. How did labor begin?
Yeah, it's funny because when we shared our story on Instagram, and then like my birth worker friends was like, you had the most birth workery birth, which whatever that means, but it tracks. So It was funny because we were going to bed. I think we were like, we had just got done eating and we were going to bed. Is it okay? And we were going to bed. And I remember feeling a trickle. And I was like, what is this? And like when you're pregnant, you had all of these fluids, so you don't really know what's what. And so I went to the bathroom, I came back and I was like, I'm still trickling. But I had been, having Braxton Hicks before, like for a couple of days. And I was like, I think my water broke, but it's weird because it's not in the sense of like the pop and your water breaks. Like I was just leaking. I was literally leaking and I was like, what in the world? And then I remember like my contractions getting, stronger and of course closer together. And I was like, you know what? It's fine. Like it's nighttime, which we know that's when the Braxton Hicks loves to arrive. And I was like, it's fine. Like, let's just go to bed. Let's rest, like whatever. And then here he is in the corner, like,
Camilla.
Like, it wasn't Camilla. It was Kaylee, our doula. And he was like in the corner, like texting, like, oh, her water broke. And I was like, babe, it's fine. Like, I'm a professional. It's never time when you think it's time. And I was like, I'm good. Like, let's just lay down, go to bed. And of course, he's like texting. And so we go to bed. And then that's when like they got stronger.
And by that time, when she was like, call Kaylee, Kaylee was like, I'm up the street.
Yeah, it was very cool because everyone worked very intuitively. Like, I really didn't expect like Kaylee to get there. And she was like, I was just going to camp out in my car from the way things were sounding. And I was like, it's fine. Like, it's going to take a while. Like, you guys go and rest. But when she got there, everything got more intense. Like we went on walks and I was like, don't bother Camilla. Like it's not time yet.
Rikki, you're just like taking care of everyone else because that's what you do.
Fine, just go rest. It's fine. And so when Kaylee got there, she was like, I'm here. And I was like, oh, I'll just let you in. And I was like, really, it's fine. Like go back to your babies. Like it's great. And she was like, you know what? Okay, but let's go on a walk. So we went on a walk and I think like you were at home like prepping, even though I was like, it's fine. But when we were walking, I was fine. And she was like, Rikki, like your contractions are literally 2 minutes apart. And I was like, okay, like whatever. I was just very, And so she called Camilla and, our midwife, and she let her know the situation. And, from there, I feel like we just kind of went into labor land. And it's so weird when we describe it because it really, truly does feel like we were in a completely different, like, plane. I know that sounds very woo-woo or whatever, but it really felt like everything was so intuitive. Our birth team was just there in it with us. And it felt like we completely left Earth, essentially. Our baby was there. Of course, our youngest dog was there, like kind of like intently, dogs can be very like, okay, what's going on,
Just watching you.
Yeah, just kind of watching. But it was very beautiful. Like, up until we prepped the space, I had like a birth vision board and everything was decorated. We decorated our bathroom. We had rose petals that we're still trying to get rid of. We had rose petals everywhere. So it was very beautiful the way we set it up. And things just, got more intense. Nice. It was, everyone was like taking pictures, which was great. And then I remember us getting in the bathtub and we both got in the bathtub. And from there, everything just stalled out. And it was very strange, and we do hear about this happening. It's like, oh, your body's taking a rest. It's fine. But from there, it just all stopped. Like we were both able to take a nap and my contractions never really picked up again. And they were like, okay, like, let's get out of the tub. Let's do some other stuff. Because we were in there for quite a bit. And then we started, kind of laboring out. But ever since then, my contractions literally never picked up a rhythm again. They were intense, but they were very sporadic. It started spacing out. It was like 5 minutes apart, then 10 minutes apart. It was very, very strange. So I remember trying all the different things. That was one of my biggest things is I want to exhaust the list. I want to try literally everything. So that's what we did, and it felt like for me, no time has passed. But when I looked up, we had a different midwife, even though our midwife was still there, but she was sleeping. And then the backup midwife came with her sweet son, and he was so sweet. He was like, 7 months, and he was just kind of hanging out, but everybody had taken a nap. Like you took a nap, came back. Nina went to sleep.
24 hours.
Yeah, this was like 24.
This is 24 hours in.
Yeah, 24 hours in.
And how many hours did you have the regular contractions before everything stalled?
For a good
12, 16.
Yeah, for a good 12 to 16 hours, everything was back. Yeah.
And then into the morning and then the evening. And then about 3 o'clock is where everything kind of stalled out.
Mm-hmm.
Picked back up again about 7-ish. And then by the nighttime, we were back at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So it had, it was crazy because she was doing everything right. Like everything was right, and it was such a long time. Typically, you labor for this extended amount of time and they're like, oh, okay, something's wrong. But all her vitals was coming out right. Her, how far she was, the heart rate, the baby's heart rate, how far she was dilated, it was just like, and honestly, and I know now, and she knows it now, I hope, that Amora just did not want to be vaginally birthed.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way she was positioned, she just wasn't with it. She didn't want to, for whatever reason,
mm-hmm.
I think it could have been a lot of different things, but it wasn't anything, wrong with Rikki. It was nothing that, she had hit all the thresholds. Like I remember, and I got tons of video, which we haven't really looked back at, but of her in the shower pushing, like,
the shower was my best friend. I was in the shower for so long, and it makes you grateful for to have the privilege, because we didn't run out of hot water. We had the special tank or whatever, and I was in there for a long time. Then we got out. We tried literally all the things,
all
right?
the tricks and a doula and midwives.
Yeah, we did Walsher's position, which the midwife was like, listen, this is the last resort. She was like, either it works or it doesn't. So we did that through contractions. We, were...
How dilated were you?
I never made it past 6. So I was steady at a 6 because they were like, we don't typically do checks, but we kind of have to see where you are. So I never moved past a 6.
Yeah.
Wow. You're stuck there for a really long time.
Yeah.
And then how was the decision made to go to the hospital?
Yeah, for us, it was very much, again, that list. I was like, I want to make sure, I don't want to look back on this and be like, oh, we should have tried that, or, oh, we should have waited, right? And our doula, again, she was very open. She was like, listen, she was like, you're doing great, because I was like, I can still go, whatever. And she was like, you're hitting a wall. She was like, I don't want to see you not be able to make the empowered decision on your own. And this turns into something where, you can't make the decisions.
Yeah.
So she was like, we can try a couple more things, but I think at that point, you should think about, transferring. And so we had a conversation. I remember it was in the bathroom. Yeah. And it's so funny because I was like, I can be modest because we're going to have, photos and things like that. And I was like completely naked and, doing birth stuff. But I remember us having a conversation and I was like, I am tired. And it's interesting because we talk about maternal exhaustion, and obviously at EBB we do. And it's not how I thought. I always thought of maternal exhaustion as oh, you overexerted yourself, or you got too excited about the labor and then you kind of had no more stamina. But for me, the exhaustion was doing all the things and then no progression, right? The baby wasn't descending. I wasn't dilating, but I was effaced a lot, which is weird. But that was the true exhaustion point for me, because I was just like, well, why am I going through this? Why am I having these, contractions if it's not doing anything?
Something was stopping it from working. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why I was just like, you know what? And then I remember at the point we decided, and I was like, okay, let's do it. So from there, we kind of switched gears. Luckily, during pregnancy, one of the things that we were instructed to do was to pack the bag, even just in case. So we already had our bags packed. Our midwife, they both called around to the different hospitals to see who would take me. Coincidentally, lots of them were like either said, I think they were very confused about the situation because they were like, well, is she pushing? Like, what's going on? And some were even like, we're full. And they were like, we don't take her insurance, so we kind of had to go down the list. And then finally we selected one, and they were like, because I had made the decision that if I wasn't having the vaginal birth at home, I'm just going to get another C-section. Like, I don't want to continue there. I don't want to go through all of that. Just, I want to be able to decide that for myself. Mm-hmm. And so I think they were kind of confused because I was like, yeah, I just want the C-section. And they were like, well, we don't have any ORs available. So you're just going to come here and you're going to labor here. And I was like, whatever, like, let's just go, because if it does turn into a true emergency, then they're going to have to,
right.
do this cesarean. But we kind of took our time, We got childcare set up, so we waited for his mom to come to take over and to watch Nina, and then we kind of like cozied on over.
Yeah, it was a real. I was driving pretty slow,
It wasn't an emergency. It was just time.
No, it was a vibe,
Yeah.
She was exhausted, but it wasn't in like, the fitness exhaustion. Like, it was just kind of like. Like, everything's going right, I'm glad that things aren't bad, but I'm just tired, I want to get this. I want to see the baby. Like, we just want to see you get out on this side. Mm-hmm. And so, I was driving over to the hospital, and I wasn't driving fast because of the contractions, and I didn't want it to be too bumpy. And then when we got to the hospital, I mean, it was like, you would never believe it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't. From our past experience, it was probably the best experience that I could ever want for someone to have.
Yeah. And when I think about it in hindsight, like, it wasn't the birth that we planned for or wanted, but I feel like it was the birth we needed. It was so much healing. Like, when we got there, literally everybody, I don't know what angels were with us that day, but it truly felt intuitive and guided by our ancestors. Like, we were smelling different things. Like, I kept smelling like this rose perfume that we all smelled, but we didn't have any rose perfume anyway. It was very beautiful. But when we got there, literally everybody was amazing. Like, our midwife got there because we made the decision. We were like, do you want your midwife to go? Do you want the doula to go? And we were like, let's have the midwife. I think she was the most rested out of everybody.
And when you go in these situations, if you go by the stigma, most hospitals, they don't like midwives. They don't like that crossover.
They don't want the home birth midwife.
No, so our, midwife is there. She's Brazilian too. So it's like, hey, it is what it is. And everyone's just kind of playing this undercover thing. And it was like, from the nurse, the intake nurse, she was
so
cool.
amazing. Literally everybody was so amazing. It's not anything that I've experienced, as a birth doula. But when we got there, the nurse was super amazing. She was like, okay, like, let me take your vitals. We got checked in super fast because they said that they were busy, but there was nobody in the lobby or anything. So
nice little room, little section.
We were sectioned off by ourselves. There was nobody else in the triage room. Like, and she was like, gonna have to check you. And I was like, do you have to? And she was like, unfortunately, I do, but I will wait as long as you want to wait. It's fine.
They asked for consent for everything.
They asked for consent for every little thing.
They asked for consent.
Every little thing.
Hey, I'm about to do this. Hey, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I? And, and knowing this and kind of being ready to be like, oh, I'm not about to do this again. It was like,
because we went in, armed and ready to like have to advocate and all the things. And that was the big thing that we focused on for him, obviously, because I was in labor. But yeah, our midwife got there before we did. We got checked. And it's very funny, like, speaking with, we talked with the team about like neurodivergence. The most annoying thing for me was that my water was still trickling. Like, it doesn't stop. And that sensorily, that was so annoying. But the triage nurse was like, okay, you're at a 6. And I was like, still at a 6 throughout this whole thing. Mm-hmm. She put the baby on the monitor. Baby was doing great. And I was like, okay, this is great. But I was still on the fence about the provider, right? The doctor. Mm-hmm. And she came in. And he had went, because we wanted to save our placenta. We didn't have a cooler or anything. So he had went to like 7-Eleven.
A bunch of stores.
Because there was no other stores around. So he like went and came back with this cooler. But it was funny because the doctor was already talking to myself and our midwife. And our faces were like completely like blank, like blown away. And so he walked in and was like, is everything okay? And we were like, it's great, because the doctor was like, hey, you're doing great. Everything looks good. Like, do you want to keep laboring? And I was like, what? Like, I expected them to offer a C-section immediately. And I was very already set, right? When I got there, I was like, I'm getting a C-section. Like, I'm done. And I told her, I was like, I'm getting a C-section. Like, just prep me. I'm ready. Like, whatever. And she was like, let's have a conversation. And she was like, I don't know what your future plans are with having more kids, but if you are planning to have more kids, it's very important that you try to have a vaginal birth. And I was like, what? And our midwife too, like the doctor was very grateful that the midwife stayed. Camilla had all of our records, she had everything. She sent it right over to her. And the doctor like thanked her and was like, thank you for sticking around. She was like, we have what we internally call like curb home birth, where they're just literally dropped off at the curb and they don't have their records. They don't have anything. So she like thanked her. And, even the doctor was like, are you guys okay? Because we were just like in such disbelief by how well we were being treated, and that she offered me consent to keep going. She was like, we can pitch you on pain meds so that you can take a nap. You can wake up in the morning and you can try again. Like, you've got this. And we were just like, what? And so she was like, I'm going to leave you to really make the decision, because she's like, we have time. Again, you're doing great. And I want you to make an informed decision. So she left the room. She was like, whenever you're ready, like, take your time. So we talked, and I was just like, what in the world? Like, we really had to wrap our mind around everything. So we talked, and I was like, I'm done.
He also, the option to do a cesarean, she confidently and boldly, it was Dr. Kim, I'm not going to forget it. She was like, I'm the best. She was like, you're in great hands. She says that everything will be done great. And, she let me and Camilla in the surgery room to sit behind the curtain while she was being cut. And that was rare. I mean, you'd be lucky enough they let the dad in, but the dad and the midwife. So Camilla's sitting there taking video of us. It was very,
because when she came back and we were like, we're going to have the cesarean, because ultimately I was just like, she's amazing, but what if we wake up tomorrow and we don't have the same doctor? All of these little things kind of led to like, okay, let me just go ahead and get the cesarean, because I don't want to lose this kind of high that we're on, because things are different, the shift changes, and I'm sure the other doctors were great, but I was like, if I were to pick, I want her to do it. I want her to be a part of this. And it felt like I was in such control, because with Nina, I felt like out of control of everything. Like, I didn't even like the doctor who did that, and I have to look at his name on her birth certificate. So this time it's like, I get to look at Amora's birth certificate and love that this is the doctor that helped us. And so, when she came back, I was like, since everything is going so great, what can I ask for? And we talk about this, in the EBB childbirth class, and we talk about like how you can advocate to get certain things. And I was like, I'm going to ask for the moon. So I asked, and I said, can they both be in the room with me? She was like, sure, no problem. And I was like, can we have the drapes lowered? Can I do skin to skin in the OR? And she was like, sure, whatever you want, And so when I got prepped and everything, it was just, it was so beautiful, because when I got in the room, the anesthesiologist was amazing. It was this nice older Black man. And he was really cool. But our team was all women except the anesthesiologist. And it was like 2 pregnant women, I believe. And they were just like, okay, let's do this. We've got this. And I think for some reason I was terrified of being able to feel anything. So I was like, can you please make sure that I'm numb? Can you please make sure? And they were like, we're going to make sure you're fine.
Oh, that great anatomy.
I know. And so they walked us through, they let them in finally. And we were like, ready to go. And I think at one point, after all of that, I think I got so overwhelmed about, how well everything was going. I started to have a panic attack.
Yeah, that was the scariest part. It's just everything was going good. And I remember, they had just cut her open. And, I could see over the veil, she's laying down. and she's talking, she's cool. And then she's just like, I can't breathe. She's like, I can't breathe. And I'm looking out. Now here it is, here it is. I look up at the anesthesiologist. I'm like, yo, he looking at me like, look, see that? See the monitor?
The monitor.
She's breathing. Everything is fine. She's having a panic attack. She was like, I don't know. And then he hit her with something. He said, boop. Boom. She just went out. I was like, yo, what did you do? And she was like, she all right. I just had to calm her down so that she wouldn't have a panic attack. She said she wasn't breathing, but she's breathing. Everything, she going to be fine. And, lo and behold, even with, the little, he put her out, it's just a little bit, but not too much. But she bounced back in like 4 hours, 4 or 6 hours. She came back and didn't have like a bunch of side effects. And, she came back into herself, gradually and was there, So that was cool. It was scary, but, that was probably.
And I think that was the first time I experienced a panic attack or anything like that. And even then, like the anesthesiologist kind of knew because I told him, I was like, I don't know, I'm kind of feeling iffy. And he was like, if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to, give you a little something to calm you down, which he did. But afterwards, like in the recovery room, I was still foggy, but the doctor, she came back in, she talked to both you, Camilla, and myself. And she was just like, everything looks great. Baby is here. Everything is fine. But yeah, from there, it was great. Even the postpartum, team, our nurse was great. And everybody was super, super helpful. And so I really feel, again, like it was the birth that I feel like we really needed, now that we're looking back at everything, no, we didn't get the home birth. But even then, looking back at pictures, for me, I was like, we did have a home birth. These photos was everything I thought it would be. Of course, we had the transfer and the repeat cesarean. But looking back, it's it's not something I look back on and, get sad about. I think the only time we were sad about is I remember the pediatrician came in to discharge us. She was the only one to use this language because everybody else was like, oh, you're a transfer, right? That's fine. She was like, you had a failed home birth. And from there, I think I lost it because I was like, that was the first time we had someone.
I was on the way out.
Yeah, it was the way out. And then I think that's when I kind of sunk in and broke down. But other than that,
Yeah, how rude.
I know. I was like, that one stung, because you don't expect it, and that kind of goes into the words we say really do matter and how we are saying things. And so when she said that, I was like,
didn't she make you back out or something?
Yeah.
And then she's like, we ain't got no more wheelchairs. It's like, what?
Yeah, I think that was the only thing. And it was like, oh, okay, this is, but I was like, you know what? I'll take it. Let's just,
if that's the only negative thing that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the transition back home, he went back home for a little bit and him and my mother-in-law, and I will always forever be grateful for this, is, they went home and they cleaned up all of the home birth stuff, but it wasn't to where it was bare. It was still an inviting, decorations and things like that because she loves to decorate. But, they both were able to take away the home birth specific things without making it feel like it was a complete loss.
Mm-hmm. And Nova, I know you said something about the baby's position. Did the OB say anything about how Amora was positioned when she did the cesarean?
I don't believe so.
Mm-hmm. She didn't, but the midwife, she was like, I was really curious as to how, maybe to give us some answers. And she said that she did see some molding on the side of Amora's head. So she was kind of she likely was positioned, with her head to the side. Mm-hmm. But the doctor, she didn't say anything specific.
Okay. And and then my other thought was just about, you were talking about the birth that you needed and how you had the healing experience of laboring at home and the beauty of that and that bonding experience. But then you also got to go back to the hospital and in a way kind of redo a cesarean in a good way.
Yeah, it really did feel like I always hear the redemption birth stories, and it's always the birth that they want vaginal or whatever. But it felt like that for sure. It was like you said, redoing and just another experience for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any advice for people listening who are planning a VBAC or a home birth or worried about a hospital transfer?
Yeah, for me, it's to make sure that you have support. Like, again, we were super lucky this time around. Like, we had our midwife, our doula to think about all of the things, right? Like, they were like, okay, set this up. Our doula set up, our meal train because she's also a dear friend. So she set up a meal train. We were supported in every aspect. Like, of course, work, everybody like was checking in on us. And so if I were to say anything is to make sure that you have support from, whether it's friends. And I know speaking specifically to Vegas, that's a hard thing because people are moving in and out. But I would say, even if you're hiring like a postpartum doula, postpartum is just as important as, preparing for the birth. So postpartum, I really felt loved as well through like our meal train and people asking to come over to specifically help. So definitely have friends that, can check in on you and have that support.
Yeah, and I would say to the people that are supporting the birthing person, if you're right next, however involved you are in that way, the number one thing that I felt was important is to reduce the amount of experience stress that the birthing person has. Like you will be okay for however, 7, 8, 9 months. Don't get caught up in the little stuff. Don't try to argue. It's just not worth it. You know what I mean? Dampen your pride, dampen your will, go through the course. If you with someone who's loving and respectful and, and treating you right, don't sacrifice your mental health for it, but be wise enough to not bring or do any additional stress. Don't go through an argument or something like that where you may look back and be like, oh, I never really had to do that. And just don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Give them that space, give that, that growing baby, that full energy, that full connection around the clock. It's very necessary. And I think that, us living in that bubble is help play to the course of actions, help play to the experience of, even with the home birth not going as planned, we were just so happy in such a good place that things just lined up how it needed to line up. And I think that's important. I think people get caught up in that stuff. And, I think, and people who aren't holding babies, who aren't birthing, we don't know. We just, unless you do know and you did know or don't know, I don't know, but I don't know. And I know the majority of us don't know. And so we have to take that step. And I don't think that information is out there enough to say, submit your will, just be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Be cool.
Thank you for sharing how you created that loving, protecting bubble of peace for Rikki. And Rikki, thank you for sharing about the postpartum aspect as well. I was thinking about that, it's another aspect of planning for a VBAC or a repeat cesarean. But when you're planning for a VBAC, you also know there's the potential you may have a cesarean as well, right? Yeah. So was there anything in particular you lined up? You said you had support with meal train and people coming by to help with different tasks. Was there anything else that was particularly helpful for your postpartum?
Yeah, I had my handy dandy cart. I had a cart full of like all of the, postpartum needs, like the pads and the things like that. And then I needed a lactation consultant. My best friend, who's also an IBCLC, which was very a humbling experience, but I needed her. So, have those professionals lined up, whether you're, interviewing during pregnancy, most lactation consultants, they do the prenatal visits. If you're not familiar with that realm, but having the people kind of ready to go and ready to come and help, who does home visits and things like that. You don't have to leave. That was the biggest difference, was that I forgot that, with Nina, we had to, leave the house to go for pediatrician visits, right? Just 7 days later and 2 weeks later and, the likes. But our midwife came to us, right? She did the baby, the well checks and things like that. And so that was very important. Just who can take you to appointments, right? Like he had to work one day and our doula came and took us to a pediatrician appointment. So that was really nice to have that support. So kind of thinking outside the box.
Like if you can't drive and you can't carry the car seat.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking outside the box of what you may need and, humbling yourself and not thinking that, oh, it'll be fine. And we have each other, like, because we both ended up needing, support. And so not just thinking, especially if it's just you two, it's like, no, you do need support. Who's the childcare? Who's, taking your oldest to school and all of those little things to think about.
Also, I want to add for people who may be thinking about doing, a midwife for the first time or something like that, like, just be okay with trying it. Like, I don't think you have to go into it saying, hey, I'm gonna get this midwife, however much they might charge, and say, once I make this decision, I have to go through this route. Like, it is a well worth the experience if, you select a good midwife to go through that pregnancy and just what's not innately provided by the medical system. It empowers you. It gives you more education, more freedom to really, have the birth that you want. And then, if you got a good OB, go to the OB too. Go get the blood work. Go do the labs. Go do however you want. But don't feel like you have to make this ultimate decision at the beginning of your birth that you're going to have your baby in a bathtub. Like, no, just the course of the midwife, obviously, because she didn't birth at the tub, that's what you think you're paying for. But honestly, it wasn't. It was the full experience. It was the education. It was being at home. It was the less stress. It was like, they come into it different. Like, a good midwife isn't going to bring the last 4 patients' problems into your consult. You might get that from a provider just because of how overworked, because of how the system is, that you might just feel it. It's not personal that, a provider could be doing that, but it's definitely worth dual care. I think it's worth it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a benefit of midwives I hadn't really thought about before, that because they focus so much on you, they can kind of leave behind other client issues and just focus on you. Whereas in a clinic, when you're back to back to back,
right, somebody might just test you out.
Yeah,
you just like,
they're bringing in a lot of stress. Yeah,
test me out. I'm seeing you. You a human. I can't fault humans for being humans.
Well, Rikki and Nova, I'm just so grateful and happy that you were surrounded by people who cared for you and supported you in so many different ways, and that you got to have the redeeming birth that you were hoping for, even though it didn't look the way you planned. So, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.